in your application to college. So, club and varsity programs. I like to relay a story about this when I start talking about it. When I was coaching at the University of Vermont, we were a club team, and I remember talking to a parent of a particularly good sailor, and she was like, well, you guys are club, right? That means like you get no money, and that's not true. So that's the first thing to know off the top of your head is that the difference between club and varsity teams is that the money, the funding, usually at the top of the ladder, it means that the funding comes from one of two places, right? With a varsity team, it comes from the athletic department. With a club team, it may come from a club sports organization under the athletic department, or it'll come from the Student Government Association of the college. That's usually the most fundamental difference between those two classifications. Practically, the difference is that with varsity teams, you kind of have a base standard of support from the university, right, or the college. So that means the travel is usually taken care of by the college, and there are full-time coaches involved, and then the program, the culture of the program usually has a base standard of commitment that matches many of the other varsity sports at the school, right? And with club teams, you can find all of those same things, but there isn't quite the same standard, right? With clubs, you can begin at the top with very competitive club teams like the University of Rhode Island and Boston University and Brown and Vermont, Fordham, Penn. There's a lot of really good club teams out there with full-time coaches and that have great resources for travel and all that sort of stuff. But then there's a much longer, bigger spread in terms of what those programs look like, kind of going down to our smallest led clubs, which are often student-led, and they really involve a lot of people who are just learning how to sail and just learning to get on the water. So I think that's the biggest difference. My advice when you're looking at a team that's a club team or a varsity team, because there is some spectrum of varsity teams too, is to go see the team. That's the most important thing. I speak from my experience at Columbia, where I didn't visit ahead of time. So I had to make some changes after that. But, you got to go see a team, and you got to go see what the practice is like, right? When you get on the water at practice, do they have 6 boats, or do they have 15 boats, right? And there are club teams with 15 boats or 18 boats every day, and there are varsity teams with just 6 boats every day. So you got to kind of go and see what it's like. And then you need to see what the leadership is like. Is it a senior who's leading the practice? Or is it a faculty advisor who's there for safety, or is it an actual performance coach? What's the situation on the water? You want to find that stuff out too. And then I think the last thing I want to talk about with this was the commitment level. Commitment level is a lot different, and one important thing is that, like Frank said, the institutional support for varsity programs is fantastic at most colleges, and that's my favorite part about working at Dartmouth is all the support we can give our student athletes. But that comes at a price, which is discretionary time and commitment. And a lot of people think, a lot of high school students hear varsity sport, and they're like, that's definitely what I want. Sometimes, it's not necessarily what you want. You really got to think about it, because when push comes to shove, with varsity teams, your commitment is not flexible, right? It's inflexible. So I had a great talk with a coach the other night about a crew on his team, and he was saying well, she's in high school, and he was saying she's not really that into working out, She's more of alternative fitness, like yoga and stuff, which is great. I think yoga's great. But on my team, you lift. And if you don't lift, you're not on a team. That's the way it works, right? It's a standard. And I think for a lot of kids, they hear that and they like it when they're sitting in the chairs that you guys are in. But when we get to college, sometimes a really good team with a little bit of a more flexible commitment can lead to a better experience for some kids in college. So I think just look really closely at the programs that you're looking at and ask yourself really honestly, what do I want to get out of my college experience? And that's my bit on club and varsity teams. Questions? Comprehensive. All right. So let's move on to, all right, everybody wants to hear about sailing applications. All right, let's go. So sailing, how does sailing impact your college application? I thought a lot about this on my drive over from Hanover, and the way that I like to think about this is that sailing the most important thing, the thing that's going to have the biggest impact on your application at any college is going to be your academics. So that's the number one thing. We want to start the conversation with that. If I remember, we'll end the conversation with that. More than anything else, if you're not academically qualified or close, certain schools are not going to be options for you, right? But if you're close academically, sometimes SailMaine can open some doors for you. And that's a good way of thinking about it, I think. Frank and I talked about this a little bit recently. I think if you look at I think it's important to keep all of that stuff in perspective, right? So sailing is not a primary college sport at most colleges. It's kind of like a non-traditional sport at most colleges. And as such, there's very little opportunities to support student athletes or applicants at any given college, right? So I try to think about the numbers. I think if you look at the elite schools, what we might think of as the elite schools, right? Like the Ivy League schools and Tufts and Bowdoin and BC and Georgetown, some of the other really competitive academic schools. We're probably looking at a total Stanford. We should throw them and MIT in there. We're looking at those most competitive schools. We're probably talking about maybe 20 applicants of each gender being supported with admissions, okay? So it's important getting a formal level of support with admissions, okay? So you want to be practical with yourself when you're looking at yourself versus kind of like the people that you might be applying into college with from your age bracket when you're thinking about formal support. The reason I give you those stats is because I think knowing that stuff ahead of time allows you to have a more concrete conversation with the coach about what the opportunities for formal support might be. Okay, so that is that. Now that being said, down the line, that each kind of if you think of them as academic tiers, there's as we open that pool bigger and bigger, more and more students are being supported or being helped to maybe achieve a little higher than their academic profile by their SailMaine abilities. So it's important to know that it is a factor, but it's not the only factor. And there's nobody out there who's like throwing down C's and D's and then getting into the best schools in the country, right? It's like you can maybe step up a little bit if you're one of the best and your grades are really close already. Okay, does that help everybody understand that? Mike, can I go for one more minute about a recruiting timeline, or you want me?
No, and then you are.
What should they send you?
What's that?
What should the candidates send you?
Right, I was going to talk about how do you communicate with college coaches and what is the timeline, right? So I think it starts, Ken and Frank, you guys might have some thoughts on this, but I usually think you want to start communicating with college coaches. Some people email me sophomore year, which is great. You are clearly an overachiever. We like that, but that can be a little early. If you're a junior already, it's not the end of the world. But by junior spring, you want to start visiting some schools, right? You want to try to get a feel for what sort of school is going to be the best fit for you. And that's, I think, one of the great things. As an aside, that's one of the great things about college sailing now versus 30 or 40 years ago, you had to go to one of the service academies or a handful of private institutions that were very competitive, and a couple public institutions. Now there's a whole breadth of institutions that are competitive with really great programs at a bunch of academic levels and a bunch of different environments, rural, urban, etc., with a bunch of different majors and academic programs. So there's a lot of options out there. So you got to get out early and kind of go check out a couple that you're interested in, see how the campus feels, see what you like, and that usually begins junior fall or junior spring. We usually, for instance, people email us junior fall, we used to say, come back in the spring, because we're overloaded with seniors during the fall typically. So that's how it goes. And you want to email the coach ahead of time. When you email the coach, send them a resume that's accurate and features your best results. It's like when you're applying for my first job growing up was washing dishes at Newport Brewery in Rhode Island. I didn't put that on my job when I applied to Dartmouth. They don't want to know about what you did when you were first getting into sailing. Just tell them past few years what your training program's been like and the handful of results you're most proud of. And emphasize the training program, what kind of clinics you've been going to, and how you're pursuing sailing. That's what people want to see. And then, and don't lie, because we have Google, so find out, tell the truth. And then, lastly, include you should put a transcript in there. If you have an unofficial transcript, should include it in the email, and also any standardized test results you already have, those are, we're gonna end up asking for them anyway, so if you have them already, put them out there, and that helps us, talk to you honestly about what we think the opportunities are. So that begins junior spring, come for a visit. Sometimes it's just a day trip. Usually I recommend day trips at first, get a feel for a bunch of schools. When you start narrowing in on the ones that are the ones you most want to be at, that's when I recommend kind of doing it overnight. Pass through the coaches a little bit. I'll be the first one to tell you, my inbox is like in the 170s for most of the fall. So, if you don't hear back from a coach within a week or 2 weeks, write back to them. And often I think what's most helpful is write back and say, all right, I'm coming on October 6th. Do you have time to meet with me? And then a lot of the time that kind of puts a deadline on things for the coach, and they can be like, oh, yes, definitely, hang on, let me get set up with somebody to spend the night with, etc. So that's kind of what the time frame's like. And then, around the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, that's when, we want to have these concrete conversations with coaches about opportunities for support with admissions. And for most of the elite schools, that means likely letters. You want to talk about likely letters. That's like a really formal level of support. And I give you that advice because if you're not talking about that, and you're just talking about whispering in people's ears or crossing your fingers and putting your name in their pillow or something, you don't want to do that. It's either formal support or if they have informal support. You want to talk to them about what the history of that's been like and how it's been successful. And so what's important is it's different at every school across the board, right? Some varsity level teams have really formal relationships with admissions, some have informal relationships with admissions, and then some club teams have more formal relationships and then less formal relationships.